Michigan Democrats jockeyed for a better position on the primary calendar. Any misgivings now that the president finds himself in an unusual fight for votes? We'll hear from the mayor of Dearborn about the Arab American vote so critical to Joe Biden's hopes. And our roundtable is raring to go too. Today is Sunday, February 25th, 2024, and this is Flashpoint. Hi, welcome to Flashpoint. We come to you this morning just 2 days shy of the Michigan primary. What a strange primary this is. The races feel very settled, but that's not to say there isn't any drama coming. President Biden has an unusual opponent on Tuesday. It's uncommitted. Now, this is no small matter. Many political strategists will tell you Michigan is the linchpin to win the presidency in November, and yet those upset with President Biden's positions on the Israel-Hamas war are urging voters to show their displeasure by withholding their support, even though they are presumably even more upset by Donald Trump's position on the matter. We're going to talk about that this morning, including a conversation with Mayor Abdullah Hammoud of Dearborn, who has found himself a point man in the national conversation on this very intense debate. And with our roundtable this morning, has the Alabama Supreme Court done the Democrats a big favor by injecting new energy and anger into the abortion debate pre-election? All today on Flashpoint. All right, I want to start this morning with the mayor of Dearborn, Abdullah Hammoud. A few weeks ago, Dearborn found itself described in the Wall Street Journal as America's jihad capital. Citizens were furious, but focus on the state's Arab American population has only intensified with a campaign to bypass voting for President Biden in the primary and instead vote uncommitted. This past week, Mayor Hammoud wrote a piece of his own in the New York Times, and our Christy McDonald sat down to talk with him this week. Here's a portion of their conversation.
I often tell people I ran on ensuring that your garbage is picked up in time. And now I'm here trying to have conversations with senior White House officials about the pathway they have chosen as it pertains to decision-making happening right now in Gaza and the West Bank. It's not where I thought I'd see myself entering my third year now as mayor. But when there are decisions that are happening and being made each and every single day that impact my residents directly or indirectly, when I have a resident coming to a council meeting who speaks of losing 80 family members overseas, that's something that I have a problem with, and that I need to lend the platform that it's been given to me by the residents, the power that I hold that they've provided me, in order to elevate their voices and to have these conversations and to advocate for a change of course. I think that falls within the realm of this Midwestern mayor.
Let's talk about when White House representatives came in a couple of weeks ago and you met with them. Was that meeting in any way, shape, or form satisfying to you?
I tell people that the dialogue doesn't matter as much as the outcomes outside of that meeting. And at this point in time, we still have not seen a drastic change of course. We haven't seen a withdrawal of military aid unrestricted to the Israeli government, Benjamin Netanyahu. We have not seen the release of funds back to UNRWA, which is the humanitarian organization providing food for millions on the ground. We have not seen a call for a permanent ceasefire. And so for us, that's what we're looking for. So the dialogue is not as important as the outcomes that come out of it.
You wrote in the New York Times that now you are going to be uncommitted on your primary ballot for President Joe Biden. Why did you feel that you needed to come out and write that?
I think it's important to hold our elected officials accountable. And somewhere between betrayal and hope is accountability. And I wrote that as well. And I think this is an opportunity for us to demonstrate that accountability, that as president, even if you are running for re-election, regardless of the party that I'm affiliated with, it is your responsibility to earn the votes of the constituency that you're trying to serve. And at this point in time, my vote has not been earned.
The reaction that I think probably media outlets all over the world will be looking from you, is that daunting to you in any way, or being able to say, now I have this voice on an international stage from the city of Dearborn?
It's daunting. It's not a responsibility anybody signs up for, but one that kind of falls to your doorstep. And, all I can say is, I don't know if I'm the one who's up to the task, but I'm the one who's here in this point in time. And I have to do the best that I can with the time that I have, with the platform that's been awarded to me by the residents of Dearborn. And that's what I'm trying to do each and every single day.
You've said recently that, quote, our position and viewpoints have not been accurately captured by the mainstream media. What has not been accurately captured from your point of view?
That we're seeking justice. You know, when we have our high school students march out peacefully and protest, you have some media outlets that say terrorist sympathizers are not protesting in schools. There are no terrorist sympathizers. We're advocating for a just solution for the Palestinian people who have been under occupation for 75 years. This is something that we live 365 days a year. We didn't just start tuning in on October 7th following those horrific attacks. We've been tuning in year round. If you followed my social media, I have friends who I know who muted me on social media over how much I talked about the issue of Palestine because it's near and dear to my heart. You know, I'm somebody who volunteered for UNRWA in 2014 in Amman, Jordan. I've been to the refugee camps, and it's really eye-opening when you understand that policy is a lever for change. And now we just want to make sure that those who have their finger on that lever are held accountable to the decisions that they're making.
That's a part of Christy McDonald's continuing series on Local 4 Plus, A Conversation With. And her full conversation with Mayor Hammoud will be available there on Local 4 Plus very soon. But good starting point for us this morning as we head toward Tuesday's primary. With me today from Densar Consulting, strategist Dennis Darnoy, deputy editorial page editor for the Detroit News, Caitlin Buss is back with us. Portia Roberson is the CEO of Focus Hope, and from Alper Strategies, strategist Jill Alper. Gang, thanks for being here. Jill, let me start with you. How big of a problem does the White House see this if Arab Americans in a very, very important state are going to, instead of voting for President Biden, vote for uncommitted? How embarrassing might that be come Tuesday night?
I think there's a very compassionate view being taken toward this vote, and it's understandable. So there are conversations happening between the community and the White House about the crisis in the Middle East. You see the president saying that working on a UN resolution to deal with the issues that the community isn't happy with. So unfortunately, you know, every day is a big day, but at the table, they're trying to move things along. So the campaign's very much focused on communicating his message and reminding people that the stakes are really high in this election and that they're working toward the general election to remind people that we don't want a dictator on day one.
Dennis, the stakes remain massive. It's hard to see either side winning their way to the White House without Michigan, right?
Oh, it can't happen.
Can't happen.
Michigan will decide one way or the other the next president of the United States. I think what will be interesting...
That wraps it up for this morning. Have a great day.
I think what will be interesting, you know, on Tuesday night is to see the overall turnout on the Democratic side. Because there are going to be people who come out to vote, you know, uncommitted. But if turnout's low, then that percentage of uncommitted is going to look a lot higher, which may give a little bit more voice. So it'll be interesting to see if other, you know, parts of the Democratic coalition turn out Tuesday night and in some way sway the overall percentage of that uncommitted vote.
Portia, we heard Christy ask Mayor Hammoud, and I've asked this of a number of people, isn't an uncommitted vote similar to voting for Donald Trump, who presumably Arab Americans would like even less in charge of this matter?
Well, I think that's something that we all have to consider, is that are we sort of promoting this next Trump presidency by voting uncommitted? I think the good news is that this is happening early, and so this is in the primary. When you talk to people who are thinking about voting uncommitted, they're looking at what the future holds if the policies don't change or if there haven't been some movement on what's going on in the Middle East. So I hope that, you know, even with this uncommitted vote, that people will begin, the administration certainly is working on and will continue to work on resolving this issue in the Middle East as best as possible.
So, Caitlin, I don't want to put you in a prognosticating kind of view, but if you start looking at Tuesday, you know, what would look bad? What would really be a poor showing? How many people need to vote uncommitted for this to be big-time trouble?
Yeah, I think if they can, you know, if the uncommitted vote can show up to be about 20 to 30% of the Democratic vote, that would be a lot. I mean, that'd be a really good showing. So I don't know that it will show up that much. But I think they've made enough noise here. And it's kind of surprising that of all the problems that Biden faced going into this re-election, this is the one that's really had the sticking power. And, you know, with all those other issues kind of in the background as well, this is the one that's broken through. And so I think he started to listen.
People not turnout, this goes back, turnout is kind of a way of voting uncommitted. Not voting is a way of voting uncommitted too, right?
Sure, and I talked to our good friend Richard Chuba earlier today, and he was saying if you look back in 1992 when Bush and Buchanan were running against each other, there's about 30% of the vote against Bush supporting Buchanan in that primary, and that really indicated that there were baseline troubles. So again, if we see numbers in that range here, that spells a little bit of problems for Biden. The other thing is to see how well Donald Trump does in the Republican primary. I think that he's probably going to win very handily, and I think, again, that sends a strong message that Donald Trump believes Michigan is Trump country, and that's going to be his ticket to the White House.
Where's your signs of trouble here, Jill, that you're going to be watching for in this on the Republican vote? We just had a poll from Epic MRA that either showed that Donald Trump is ahead by the margin of error, but if you take the margin of error the other direction, he's showing a lead in the state right now. What would be where would you get a lift if you're a Democrat from seeing Donald Trump showing Tuesday?
Yeah, I think sometimes you can learn things from these results, but I'm one to always say that one election doesn't mean the next. I don't have a crystal ball. What I can tell you is what's unfolding right now around reproductive freedom. Trump saying that he could be, for a 16-week ban because it sounds like a good round number. The people on the right are upset with him and his coalition, and in the middle, and in our world, but the middle of our state, right, the middle of this country, people are going to be on fire about this issue, and especially also with what's happening in Alabama. So I think he's in a little bit of quagmire in his own party, and I think it doesn't portend well for him in the general election.
I was going to save this for later, but since you brought it up, Portia, it strikes me that where, obviously Democrats, given what happened in the last election, would love to make everything about abortion if they can. And was there a way to do that? Well, the Alabama Supreme Court may have provided, right?
They helped Democrats tremendously with this ruling. And I will honestly say I think they helped with white Republican women, because I think there are a large majority of those women who are really concerned about their reproductive rights being restricted, and they're seeing that the Republican Party continues to move the needle farther and farther to the right and much more conservative than they want to be. Now, the reality of it is when you do these polls and somebody's sitting next to their husband who's a big Trump supporter, women are likely to say, yep, I'm supporting Trump as well. But when they get in that booth by themselves, sometimes they cast a ballot on what they really want to do in terms of protecting themselves and their daughters, their nieces, and their sisters.
Yeah, I just happen to have a white conservative woman with us today. It's funny you should mention it. What do you think about the new energy that the Alabama Supreme Court has injected back into the abortion debate?
Yeah, it's a fair point, and I don't think abortion is going anywhere this election. I think that will continue to be fought, at every level of the ballot, because, we've seen in Michigan, we put it in the Constitution, but there's still that threat, and they're able to dangle, that Trump threat out there that the justices could overturn this, or there could be a national ban or something like that. At the same time, I thought Kamala Harris missed a great opportunity to speak to more urban voters and speak to some of the issues, of the constituents that have defected from Biden. And so it's not necessarily going to be all about abortion. I think there are other concerns that might end up, being more important than abortion this time around. But we'll have to see. It definitely is something that candidates on the Republican side will have to deal with.
You were both with the vice president this past week over in Grand Rapids. You want to address that?
Sure. She's on fire. And I think to your point, though, the campaign understands it's a panoply of issues, and we'll take all of the contrasts from healthcare to education.
Voting rights. I think if you look at, the comparison between Biden and Trump, when we talk about whether someone like me would vote uncommitted in this case, I'm more concerned about 4 years from now, me not having a right to vote. I think those are going to be issues that come up in urban communities across the board. And I think when we start to address those, and the administration has already started a bit of that, we will.
I'm going to take a quick break. When we get back, though, the issue that the president can't seem to get around, and that is his age. This is Flashpoint on Local 4. Back with more in just a minute. Welcome back to Flashpoint as we point our way toward the Tuesday primary with Dennis Darnoy, Caitlin Buss, Portia Roberson, and Jill Alper. Dennis, we've talked ad nauseum about this being the election that no one seems excited about. I think 70% of Americans wish that they had different candidates to choose from. We have two men who are, I guess we used to say elderly. I don't know what elderly is anymore as I'm getting older. But it's Joe Biden who seems to be the one that has the biggest problem shaking the idea that he's too old for the job with many voters.
He does. And I think, when you've seen a president at the end of his term, they usually look a lot worse than they did when they first started their term. So when you think about Joe Biden and serving another 4 years, and then some of the mishaps that he has, which are natural, but when you have questions surrounding your age and your mental capacity, it doesn't help the cause. And I would say to their campaign, when you skip media avails, when it looks like you're hiding from the general public, it feeds into that narrative. And it is a narrative that they're going to have to counteract. And by pointing out Donald Trump and his lack of physical fitness and his mental issues as well, it doesn't play. I mean, it doesn't play as much. So the fact is he is president, but heading into this re-election, people really question, is he up for the job for 4 more years? And if he's not, then what does that actually mean?
Jill, how do you fight back about that? I don't know if you've watched much Sean Hannity lately, but whatever the AARP is, his show every night is the opposite. It is just a continuing monologue about how this old person can't do anything, is infirm, can't make decisions. It's a really tough thing for the White House to try to fight against.
You can't change the president's age, but what you also can't change are his accomplishments. Bar none, the fastest growing economy in the history of our country. Inflation, it's been a problem. It's going down. There's a COVID hangover. People aren't happy. But what I've seen in research is when you take almost like a grandfather or an uncle, somebody we always love with the right values, up against crazy and wrong, this guy wins all the time. So we need to not talk about his age. We need to talk about his record.
Caitlin, they're struggling to get that message out, it seems.
They are. And, he missed the Super Bowl opportunity. Even his social media presence ages him, even though the intention, I think, is to relate with younger voters. But
the TikTok?
The TikToks, the chocolate chip cookies, the snacks. I mean, it's cute, but he has a real perception problem. And to the point that the White House was showing him, walk across the lawn this week and saying he made it all the way. When you're in that position, that's not a good place to be messaging from.
Portia.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, look, he's old, and so is Donald Trump. So, I mean, I honestly, I'm picking between 2 old white men. I mean, that's the reality that I have to deal with. The fact of the matter is that, as Jill has said, Joe Biden's record stands on its own, and Trump is someone who represents a party who yesterday a person on I think it was Fox said, black people will come to vote for Trump because we like sneakers. So there's no possible way that I'm voting for Donald Trump, and I don't really understand how urban communities as a whole would think about voting for a man who represents a party who thinks that we vote based upon the fact that we are going to like his China-made sneakers.
2 older white men.
Senior.
Let's say senior. Can either of you, who are in a lot of these conversations, and I know you would be tried for treason if you said otherwise, but I'm going to ask anyway, can you see any path forward where it's someone other than Joe Biden as the Democratic nominee?
No.
I thought that for a short period of time. I thought there was a possibility that there was going to be a switch because I kept hearing it, but I don't think so at this point. I don't know how you could stand up a national campaign in a short period of time with somebody other than President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. And I think those are the right people for the job, and they'll get it done. They've been getting it done for the last 4 years.
I'll let you two answer the same question. Is the roster set?
I think so. I mean, I agree. I thought for a short while there might be a coup of some kind at the convention or something like that. But I think Biden has showed that he's determined himself to stay there. And so that's the switch for me.
Yeah, I mean, this is who we're going to have. And people have known this for a while. They just didn't want it. But the fact of the matter is, this is who we're going to have. And it's now 8 months away from the general election, and we're in a general election right now.
As a political reporter, we just lust over the idea of a convention that gets blown open with some real drama, and it just never quite seems to happen. Dennis, I want to ask you about something else, though. You mentioned Richard Zuba, our pollster, earlier. I've had a number of conversations with him now. He is adamant that so Michigan has the second highest number of Polish American voters, only behind Wisconsin, and that Donald Trump's comments about NATO. If you haven't noticed, Poland is the next stop if Russia decides that this is a tour after they leave Ukraine, and that NATO is what is keeping Poland free and secure, and that those comments will somehow lose him the Polish vote.
Yeah, I mean, and what he's saying, and it does make a lot of sense, is that's a generational issue. That's something that, the stories get told and they get handed down by generation. And so the fact that Donald Trump is basically saying, or did say, Russia's free to go and do what they want to do with these NATO countries, that is going to be something that is used within that community. And as we said, earlier, if there's maybe one segment sitting out and not participating, that could galvanize another part of the segment of the population. And again, they're predominantly, that community is predominantly in southern Macomb, and that's always a battleground area, and one that a Republican who's going to need to win if he's going to win statewide.
Jill, I've had a couple of conversations with some conservative voters about this NATO comment, and when I say, well, NATO has kept us out of World War III probably for the last 75 years. The comment that comes back to me is, yeah, but those people, nobody pays their fair share. That seems to be a stronger argument than the good that NATO has done. That's another challenge for the White House.
Sure, and that is something I think that Trump harped on a bit in the first election. But again, it's sort of the chaos and the craziness of a former president standing up and encouraging that kind of behavior in the world. It's a chaos that people don't want to return to. And I just don't see people thinking about their pennies. I think they'll be thinking about America's standing in the world.
It's interesting, Caitlin, Alexei Navalny is dead. We watched this very strange interview with Vladimir Putin recently, and I have wondered what kind of somersaults Ronald Reagan is doing in his grave over the current take on Russia and its very dictatorial leader.
Yeah, I think everyone's making really good points. I think it is somewhat of a generational issue, but and that points to the fact that the Republican base is changing so much. Because if you go out and talk to those voters, those stories, Reaganisms don't even really matter. They want to keep the money here. They want to see it spent bettering, their incomes, their family, dealing with domestic issues. And so while they might not understand the intricacies of NATO over the past, 70 years, they have opinions about it. And I know you said they don't want to, vote with their pennies, but I actually think that on the Republican side, that's what they're looking at for sure.
In fact, that was part of the argument that we just watched play out in Congress, that there's not near enough worry about our own borders, and we're worried about what happens on the Ukrainian border.
Yeah, I think that's a concern that young people have. Certainly, they feel like we're spending too much money in other places and not enough on domestic issues, and I think that's going to have to be addressed by the administration. I think there's going to have to be a real push to communicate to the American people what they've been able to accomplish over the last 4 years. But, I keep going back to, where is the Republican base that's going to speak truth to power and be able to pull away from the craziness that is Donald Trump? And we haven't seen that yet. And I keep waiting for someone who's been there a while to stand up to that.
Quickly, Dennis.
I don't think they want to. And I disagree with you, Jill. This is the one time I do, that they actually do want chaos. And that is part of the election component.
I got to get to a break. Gang, thanks so much for the conversation. Really appreciate it. We'll wrap things up for Flashpoint right after this. Michigan is now an early voting state, but if you want to do that, today is the last day to do that, and then we point our way toward Tuesday. Obviously, we'll have that covered for you here. I'll click on Detroit, on Local 4, and on Local 4 Plus. Have a great week. Meet the Press coming up next. We'll see you next time on Flashpoint.